I know the world has been focused on Washington, D.C. today, and we'll get to all of that in just a moment. But to me, the most important concern for Australians on this day should be a major snub to our special day, Australia Day. This time, it's not the likes of angry Green Senator Lydia Thorpe or the divisive independent federal MP Zali Steggall calling for a dark day of mourning to become the priority. It's the new mob of virtue signallers at Cricket Australia. Yes, the sporting organisation that's supposed to epitomise Australian spirit and specialise in Australian sporting contests. In what must rank as the greatest betrayal of this country by a sporting body, Cricket Australia will rename its Big Bash extravaganza January 26 and drop entirely any reference to what the day is, which is Australia Day. Talk about cancelling our culture. Maybe we should get rid of the Australian flag as well. Maybe we should take the flag out of the hands of the kids who turn up on Australia Day. This apparently is after consulting Indigenous leaders. They haven't consulted the Indigenous leaders I know. Maybe they've consulted Lydia Thorpe, because only the noisy, angry, black armbanders would advise them to ignore what the day is. But according to the Telegraph, it was Cricket Australia's First Nations Advisory Committee, which is co-chaired by former cricketer and now commentator Mel Jones. Do they know that two major surveys last week showed that only between 8 and 11% of those surveyed didn't want Australia Day held on January the 26th? Do they know that this is extremely divisive and about as un-Australian as any sporting code could get? It's one thing to recognise Indigenous culture, as we should on Australia Day. It's another thing to avoid even mentioning it almost like as if it's some kind of badge of shame. This was how government leaders reacted to the news today.
Well, it's not cricket. That would be my reaction. Look, I think Australian cricket fans would like to see Cricket Australia focus a lot more on cricket and a lot less on politics. On Australia Day, it's all about acknowledging how far we've come.
It's something that the public won't cop. Most Australians understand, the different views around Australia Day, but Australia Day is our national day of celebration. And we don't need to disrespect Indigenous people doing that. We need to make sure that on every day of the year we're a respectful society, and we are. And the trouble with these sort of token attempts is that it drives a wedge even further.
Now, a little later, after those comments were made, the Prime Minister made another attempt to defend the status quo, but he did get himself in a bit of a tangle.
On Australia Day, it's all about acknowledging how far we've come. When those 12 ships turned up in Sydney all those years ago, it wasn't a particularly flash day for the people on those vessels either. And I think what that day to this demonstrates is how far we've come as a country. And I think that's why it's important that we mark it in that way.
Now, there were actually 11 ships, and 48 deaths at sea on that journey doesn't quite equate to the loss of Indigenous lives over the next 100 years. But he's right. This disgraceful edict from cricket authorities has come after a season of misguided firsts, no doubt encouraged once again by this First Nations committee too, including taking a knee, which is the brainchild of Black Lives Matter, the insidious anti-white Marxist movement. It's not some cute gesture to avoid racism. We all deplore racism. It's a gesture devised by a violent American movement designed to campaign against the high number of killings of black lives by police. That's not an issue in this country. The fact that we've seen so many cricketers take a knee this summer is an embarrassment for Cricket Australia, which has interpreted its origins and its context entirely incorrectly. How easy would it be for Cricket Australia to not only get the players to wear their Indigenous shirts, which they're doing, but then to do what all major cities do each year on Australia Day and include an Indigenous ceremony at the ground before each of the 3 games? That's respectful, that's inclusive, but to remove Australia Day in some kind of politically correct gesture of shame, I'm sorry, it crosses the line by a long way. It's totally unacceptable. And here's an even better idea. How about Australia's major sporting bodies stick to playing their sport? And as the Prime Minister said today, stop playing politics.